We had a very interesting experience yesterday when we were getting ready for Mary Ward's funeral service. We came in, and this piano was sitting in the way because the family needed to sit here. And so I and the funeral director started to move it out of the way, and we got it to right here, and that leg fell off. It did again. Susan told him, was supposed to warn him about that, because some places the little dollies are one, they're all connected, but these are three little separate dollies, and we discovered that leg isn't screwed on or glued on. It's got a metal plate on the piano and one on the top of the leg, and a little kind of like a figure eight thing that slips down in and holds it in place. So it was very difficult getting it repositioned and getting the leg back on. But if the little pedal thing hadn't have been there, the whole thing may have fallen down and crushed my legs because I was on that side underneath it. So thank you, Jesus. You saved my legs from a terrible catastrophe. Anyway, we learn something every day. Well, that's interesting. I'll have to talk to Joel and Susan about talking to each other, because I was going to tell them all that, and I did tell our custodians that need to be careful with that. But until we get new tile to take up this space, there's like a half-inch lip right there that the wheel doesn't roll over. It catches. Well, back to Wesley. Have you all been thinking about John Wesley and our Wesleyan heritage all week long? And Good. Well, where we ended up, we got Samuel and Susanna had somehow met, and they got married November 11th in 1688. And they both had fathers that were preachers in the London area, and they were nonconformist. But the children were, the pendulum swings back and forth from generation sometimes. But it was a very hard life for this young couple while Samuel was working to earn an appointment to a church of his own to be senior pastor somewhere instead of associate. And that came sometime in 1695. And what came with that appointment was a parsonage called a rectory in the Anglican tradition. And so they had a roof over their heads, and that was a blessing. Now, you remember I told you John was born in 1703, so in 1695, it was a few more years before he was born, and like 15 years before after they were married. But in 1709, when he was only 5 years old, the house they were in burned down. And little John, everybody got out except John, and they saw him in a second-story window, and they were able to rescue him. But this became a part of the family heritage. They called him a brand plucked from the burning, or some would call it plucked from the fire. And a brand is like a little spark or an ember, and since he was so little at that time. But he and his mom felt like because he was rescued just in the nick of time, that this was a God thing and that he was being saved for some special role or purpose in life. But when he was 6 years old, the parsonage or rectory was rebuilt, and his family lived there until Samuel's death in 1735. And he died with his boots on, died still serving the church. But when that happened, a new rector was appointed and was given the rectory or the parsonage. Now, all the kids were pretty much grown by then, but where did Susanna go? That was her home until he died, and then she had to give up the house to move away. Now, that's one of the problems with the parsonage system. it's great when you're young and you don't have a big house payment and you have a place to live, but toward the end of life, if something happens and you're living in the church parsonage and the pastor dies and leaves a widow, she can't stay there because the new appointment comes, and a part of the appointment is the parsonage. But we still have a parsonage system, but in a lot of places, particularly in urban areas like Tulsa, most are able to have housing allowances, and so that has been kind of a good thing. But when I was out at St. Stephen's in Broken Arrow, and we were had the little parsonage, it was 110 or 1,100 square feet. It was pretty small, little parsonage. And my wife at that time and I had fixed it up. We didn't go through the problem of having to ask the trustees to fix the house. We just did it ourselves and then said, if you like what we've done, you can reimburse us for the materials. They liked what we did. We got reimbursed for the materials. So that, and one thing happened when we'd gone on a vacation, we were gone a few days, the toilet, the tank was cracked, and it decided to separate enough to start leaking. So when the tank is leaking, it just keeps running. So when we got back, we walked in and squish, 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 squish on the carpet, and it anyway. So the insurance bought brand new carpet. So there was new carpet and our fixing things up, and we were able to get the house sold within a week. So we were able to get out of the parsonage and own our own home. However, the downside of that was this was after the savings and loan debacle, and so a whole bunch of that's another story. Anyway, interest rates were 14%. It was at that real high inflation. It was in the 80s. It was terrible. But anyway, we got our own parsonage and our own house, and then anyway, there's a lot of stories. I could go on. I will save them for another day. We got to talk about Wesley. But anyway, a part of that parsonage system was this crisis that happened with Samuel's death, and so Susanna had to go live with her children. And fortunately, she had several. But anyway, after the fire, the rectory was rebuilt, and so she was using the kitchen to homeschool all of her children. Now, this is in the days when homeschooling was not like a nonconformist puritanical action like it is with a lot of people today. They will homeschool because they think public school is a corrupting influence, either socially or they're anti-science, so they don't want their children to be taught evolution and other things, so they'll homeschool. But in Susanna's day, there was no public school system to reject and then choose homeschooling instead. It was the only way children could be educated up to a certain level, sort of their elementary education would be homeschooling. And if they could get that done, then they might be able to pay for what we would call junior high and high school in order to prepare for college. Now, that was usually only the wealthier class, or if a pastor could get somebody to help sponsor a pastor's children if they liked you well enough. Anyway, we imagine that it was done in the kitchen because there was a big family and Susanna had to be preparing meals. So while she was doing meals, she was multitasking, having the kids at their work while she was doing her work. Historians say that they spent 6 hours a day at the instruction of the children. Now, they didn't have computers and TVs and all kinds of handheld things. They were lucky to have written material, to have books. And so there weren't very many distractions for the education, so the children were very well read. But Susanna was very intelligent and articulate, with a rich and fruitful spiritual maturity that she got from her own biblical studies since she was educated, and able to read other writings. And they had good theological discussions in their home. They welcomed the questions and doubts from their children, which became table talk discussions with the whole family, and that was a good thing. I can remember when I was growing up, I had two older sisters, and anyway, we had a good time at the dinner table. We're always discussing things and having debates about different issues and so forth. But anyway, it was stimulating and enlightening. But from that deep well of spiritual maturity that Susanna drew, the lessons and insights for leading the teaching of her children, but also she drew upon that for family devotions Sunday evening. She was the one who would lead that. They would be in church and Samuel would preach on Sunday mornings, but Sunday evenings, since it was the Sabbath, they didn't do a bunch of other things. This was dedicated to being in tune with and at one with God. So she led these Sunday evening. Now, there was one time when Samuel was in London. Didn't say exactly what he was doing there, but he was there on business, probably church business, religious business. He may have had to go before the bishop or something to, give an account of his ministry or something, so he would go there, and he was out of town. Now, at that time, he had an associate who was called a curate who would preach for him on Sunday mornings when he had to be gone. Now, travel took a long time, and they were 130, 150 miles away. And so I imagine since he loved the city and didn't like the rural area so much, he would stay as long as he could and enjoy whatever he was doing. Maybe he's taking a short sabbatical. But anyway, he had a curate who would preach for him while he was gone. But the story is that associate was quite dull and not very inspiring. Now, his congregation was hungry for spiritual nurture. So they would show up Sunday evening at the parsonage to listen to Susanna's devotions. And since she was very bright and very articulate, she was gathering quite a crowd. In fact, more were coming Sunday evening than Sunday morning. And the curate had gotten all upset about that, and he wrote Samuel a letter criticizing the situation. And so Samuel, being a good churchman and trying to keep the peace wherever he was, he instructed Susanna that she probably ought to cease and desist from the devotions, or at least not invite the congregation. Now, here's her response. Let's see, it says, the associate, Mr. Inman, complained to Samuel about the services that Susanna was holding in their home, and Samuel wrote asking her to stop, since it was considered scandalous that a woman would be, in essence, preaching to the congregation. Now remember, there wasn't much education for anybody, much less the girls. And so it was very rare for her to be well educated and then drawing upon that education to be very articulate. This was very quite rare and scandalous to the sensitivities of many, many folks. So Susanna responded to her husband about this with these words: "If you do, after all, think fit to dissolve this assembly, do not tell me that you desire me to do it, for that will not satisfy my conscience. But send me your positive command in such full and express terms as may absolve me from all guilt and punishment for neglecting this opportunity of doing good when you and I shall appear before the great and awful tribunal of our Lord Jesus Christ. So, anyway, it's going to be, if you make me stop, it's on your head when we go to meet our Maker. Anyway, after that, Samuel didn't say another word about the services. Now, Susanna had a profound and continuing influence on the faith of her children. Her writings included an extended catechism preparing her children. And what's remarkable is how intentional she was about forming the faith of her children and continuing to invest in their faith when they became adults. She was a commanding presence in John's life, and they stayed close through their letters her whole life, and he often would write her asking for her advice for different problems when they came up in his ministry. And many times she changed his mind about issues. And in one case, a layman had begun preaching, and John was against having any but ordained clergy preach. And Susanna challenged her son to listen first, to listen to the man preach, and then to see that God was, if God was or was not working through him. And Wesley did as she suggested, and from that time on, lay preachers became an important feature in the Methodist movement. So, that's such an important lesson, because so often people will make a decision on principle without examining the situation and getting more information from examining the situation. Is just kind of a knee-jerk reaction, and so often that will prevent something good from developing or happening. But anyway, among the beautiful things Susanna did with her children was to spend 1 hour a week with each child, asking about their faith, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, the state of their souls. And I think it may be from this. In all my years of ministry, I hardly ever had these one-on-one consultations with the DS, but in the last few years, they've instituted this, that every pastor needs to go meet with the district superintendent and just discuss things, which is good. I mean, it's good for that person, if there's going to be a change in appointment, that district superintendent knows you and has some idea of what each pastor's journey in faith has been, and what that pastor may look to the future in various career paths and places. People like to get more experience in areas that they haven't had opportunity to, so sometimes it's a move would be justified for growth's sake. Sometimes someone can get stale and burnt out or whatever, and they need a change. But what kind of change? Is it going to be a change to help a person grow, or is it going to be a disaster? A change that's just a terrible fit. But anyway, when we go meet with a district superintendent, and like I say, I think it's drawing upon Susanna's custom of meeting with her children, the district superintendent will ask, "So, Bill, how is it with your soul?" So how would you all like to come in and meet with your pastor once a year and have me ask, "So, Ann, how is it with your soul?" But anyway, it's an invitation to get below the superficial, polite conversation and really talk about the deeper things. I mean, is there something really troubling you? Is there some unhealed wound that you've received from some experience? How is it with your soul? Are you struggling with doubts that, there really is a God, because I've been so good and God's supposed to bless the good, but all these bad things are happening to me? And so either somebody taught me wrong about right and wrong, and I'm doing wrong and not knowing it, or God doesn't really reward the good. Or maybe there isn't a God because these things are happening to me. It's not fair. So all those troubling things that might be going on as one develops an understanding of life and how it works, and faith and how it works. So anyway, that aspect of her meeting with each child for 1 hour a week was a good thing. And it's a suggestion in parenting times. A lot of times some folks think that who've got more than one kid, well, we're always together and we're always doing these things and we're always having a good time, but there's never that chance for one-on-one to talk. And so some families, as children get older, each parent will take a time to take one child and go to lunch or go get an ice cream, to where there's this one-on-one. We found that, so often when parents are trying to find out what's going on with the kids, it's, asking questions, and as soon as something comes out that raises the red flags or turns on the alarm, then all of a sudden the parent stops listening and starts lecturing. And that's the best way to get the kid to stop talking and not to share honestly, because they don't want to get lectured. And so it just destroys the possibility for communication and guidance. So that one-on-one without the interruptions, and learning to really be caring and concerned. But anyway, it's a suggestion in parenting to make time for one-on-one where there aren't any other issues. And with families with more than one child, a lot of times a big issue is with a child is, do you really love me as much as you love the other? And sometimes another issue is the kids are having trouble with each other, and they're really frustrated with something. The younger one's always getting into my stuff and broke my stuff or lost my stuff. All kinds of different things that it's good to have a chance to resolve that. Anyway, Adam Hamilton has really emphasized that influence of Susanna on John, and then he moves on to what was the influence of Samuel on his father, and the grandfather's influences. The other sources point out that Samuel and Susanna kept their children shielded from their parents, from their grandfathers, from their own fathers, because those grandfathers were nonconformist in their beliefs and their church polity, and Susanna and Samuel had kind of swung back the other way and were very loyal to the Anglican tradition and the more high church style of worship and those spiritual disciplines that took to the guidance of the church fathers and mothers in the faith, whereas the nonconformist is, the Spirit is speaking to me now, and what I'm feeling in my heart and soul, that's what's right. That's what's right now. And all that tradition has led us astray. And so we don't want that. We want to be free. Free. So anyway, they didn't want that kind of influence because they were trying to discipline their children and don't give them any of this nonconformist kind of stuff, because if they start on that path, you combine a nonconformist ideology with the adolescent tendency to push back and want to rebel in order to find his or her own way, and you've got an explosive situation. They felt, particularly when they had so many children. Anyway, so, and then we think those grandfathers were back in London, that 150 miles away, and everybody was clergy and had to work on Sunday, there wasn't much opportunity to visit, and particularly not at Christmas time, because that's high holy days, and so you don't get away and go do family time. So they were pretty much kept away from the influences of those that part of the family. However, once Wesley was grown and engaged in his own ministry, he did learn some of his grandfather's nonconformist Puritan faith, and since his own ministry led him into conflicts with the traditional church and the authorities within the church establishment, he did draw upon some of that family heritage to inform his decisions of how to proceed with his revival and his renewal movement, although staying a loyal priest within the church and never breaking away himself. Now, Hamilton does a little bit of analysis of that, and he says that Wesley knew of the conflicts between his parents and their fathers, but he adopted a way that's called the via media, or the middle way, and he found a way of looking and listening to both sides in order to find truth in each side that could be kind of combined and find compromise or middle way. But he did become sympathetic to some of the things that were in the Puritan response to the Catholic abuses. So he did learn to embrace both. Now, in his explanatory notes to the New Testament, he wrote these words that kind of capture that sense of combining the two. He said, I don't know where this is getting a little short in the wire. Not in the signal. There. Oops. Well, anyway, would to God that all the party names and unscriptural phrases and forms which have divided no, it's because of their taste or because of their training or their education. And sometimes things change because of, we've just had a number of years and people do things differently now. And it just slowly evolved. One big example, I don't know how many of you have noticed the change in our communion liturgy. Anybody notice any changes in communion? Yeah, a little bit? Okay. One of those changes has been we're doing communion almost once a month, whereas we didn't do big church communion, but once every 8 weeks, 6 or 8 weeks, when Dr. Biggs was here. So the frequency has changed, and that's more Wesleyan, because John Wesley, had a big sermon on constant communion. Communion is so important. You should go every week. Seize every opportunity you have to receive the elements of the communion service, the Eucharist. So more frequent is more Wesleyan. Something that is less Wesleyan in one sense is the liturgy. When we would do communion here with Dr. Biggs, he loved the old communion service we find in the hymnal that goes back to the Anglican Book of Common Worship style. If you go to an Episcopal church, it'll sound very much like we do, using that liturgy. However, the new liturgy was developed and came out in 1972. Now, 1972 is a long time ago, so it shouldn't be called new liturgy. But that was the result of a real broad ecumenical effort to find renewal and revitalizing our worship. It had gotten pretty stale and staid, and most denominations, or mainline denominations in the Catholic Church, were trying to find ways to revitalize our worship. And so there was a lot of cross-fertilization and intra-communication between the denominations, and actually this modern liturgy that we use, and it's been adopted by our church and is in the hymnal, but it goes all the way back to Bishop Hippolytus in the middle of the 4th century, the 300s, as the earliest still existing copy of a communion liturgy from early church times that we have. And they use that as the basis for rebuilding a new, revitalized kind of liturgy for our communion service. So in that sense, even though it doesn't go back to Wesley's love of the Book of Common Prayer liturgy, it does capture his Catholic spirit, because the 1972 liturgy came out of a broad ecumenical Catholic universal church effort to revitalize our worship. In the Catholic Church, what they were trying to overcome was a dynamic in their worship where the priest had his back to the people and would say the Mass in Latin that very few of the congregation understood. And they were told, and in their theology, that the liturgy changes those elements into the real body and blood of Christ. And so it almost took a superstitious, magical effect on it. The people would be out in the pews doing their rosary and saying their Hail Marys and their Our Fathers and doing their spiritual discipline as individuals isolated in their little spots. And the priest was doing, this mystical, as some would say, mumbo-jumbo up there. And it didn't have the right understanding of getting back to Jesus breaking bread with the disciples as a part of a meal where there was this intimacy between the host and the ones receiving the elements, and they realized they had lost that. And so the Catholic Church made radical change. They put the liturgy into the vernacular. It's English for us, German and Italian and French, wherever the country was, they translated it into the language of the people. And the priest turned around and faced the people. We've got a little problem, and we've talked about, it's a big problem. In the cathedrals, they're built in the shape of a cross. You had the transepts on the side and this long, skinny thing where the people sat. And then the chancel area was like the top of the cross, the part above the crossbar. And a lot of times you had a divided chancel. That meant that it went all the way to the back wall, and the altar was way at the back wall, and the choir lofts were on both sides, a divided chancel, and the people were out there, and the priest was way up there. Well, they brought the table down to the middle of the congregation, and the priest would face the people, and he'd pick up the bread and break it, and go through the liturgy and show the people. And so the liturgy had the 4 parts: take, bless, break, give. And that's what is in our scriptures. He took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, he gave it. And so we rehearse what Jesus did, not only saying it, but doing it. And so those were parts of a renewal movement. So anyway, in our using the more contemporary liturgy, we have more of a Wesleyan Catholic spirit at work. Let's see, where was I in my notes? Okay, here we are. Back to Wesley. He had learned another important spiritual quality from his father Samuel, Adam Hamilton tells us, and that was perseverance. Now, Hamilton states that when suffering, tragedy, or opposition, and we may call it by another name, persecution, come, we are not to give up, but turn to God for strength and encouragement and courage to hang in there. Samuel and Susanna had lost 9 children to death at birth or in very early infancy. And I can't remember what the total number of them was. It was up around 18 or 22. It's something. She had lots of children. I need to look that up and find it. But anyway, they did not turn bitter and angry at God for having so many children die, but were grateful for the children that survived. And frankly, they were pretty much realists because they didn't have modern medicine. And they're grateful that Susanna could survive because it's like 25% of women would still die in childbirth at that time. So the second thing they had to overcome was they were dirt poor, and Samuel was often in debt. And thirdly, Samuel was not the most tactful person. He alienated people all the time. As I mentioned, he was a city boy, and he loved the city, and he didn't really care for this country life out at Epworth. And he and Susanna were both highly educated, and most of the congregation was not educated. And so that put them kind of in different places and understandings about things. And the fact that he really wasn't very tactful at all. He had a way of alienating and upsetting people in the congregation. And he had one case where he had borrowed some money from one of the parishioners for some reason, and then he got this guy really mad, and so he called for him to pay the debt back, and when he couldn't, this parishioner had him thrown in debtor's prison. So, and there weren't enough people with any money who liked him to bail him out. He couldn't get out till the bishop bailed him out. Now, how would you guys feel if one of your appointed clergy got thrown in jail and had a high bail bond or debt? Would you bail us out? Anyway, it's a problem. Anybody ever face that with, well, I know of one case, but I won't go into that. But anyway, there are situations that happened that was really hard for Samuel and Susanna and the children to have to deal with. And when Samuel was in prison, the way he dealt with that was he looked at it as an opportunity. Here was an opportunity to fulfill the great commandment of Jesus to visit those who are sick and in prison. So since he didn't go there willingly, but since he was there, that was his ministry while in prison, was to minister to the other prisoners. And so he looked at it as kind of sort of a God thing that he was there so he would minister. But once he got out, he had learned some lessons, but John was observing, and and he saw this perseverance of his father's faith and determination to try to do what he understood was the right thing in spite of unpopularity and opposition, and we might say persecution even. So those were some of the strengths. Also, that fire at the parsonage, they believe was arson. I think some angry parishioner had set the house on fire, and that John's being saved was only by a couple of brave men. One got on the other's shoulders and could reach up and grab little John out of that window just a hair's breadth before the whole roof had collapsed on that place where John was standing. And so the family was very, very, very grateful. So those were the kinds of things that Hamilton sums up. The three things that he believed that Wesley got from his childhood home was that example of his parents' very strong faith, their prayer life, their deep spirituality, their teachings, and their creating this environment. And the second was Wesley developing the Catholic spirit from his childhood home, knowing that his parents felt really strongly where they were, but that their fathers were at an entirely different place. And he observed the conflicts between his father's ministry and the congregation. He saw that there was a lot of going on, and he probably could observe and listen and see that, you know, some of the people that were upset with his dad may have had a good point. And although he knew his dad's reasons for whatever the issue was, kids pick up. They know what's going on. So anyway, so the example of their spiritual life, and then that climate of the struggle and developing that Catholic spirit, and then thirdly, that perseverance, and so forth. Well, we've just about ended our hour here, so I won't launch into a new chapter. Any questions or any comments about what we've covered about Wesley? Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. She's asking if we'll ever use that service. I'm sure we will sometime. I'm not sure when. I am not on that planning part. It's not my job description right now, but I could pass the word along. Some of you really like that service and miss it. So how many love that service and miss it? Okay, about a fourth? Yeah. Well, a part of it is when we're planning a service and we look at the whole of the service, sometimes the spirit and the mood of one kind of liturgy, and we did this, there's a whole lot of ability to vary the service with the modern one, and when we were doing lots of Vesper services and we'd have different themes, we could adapt that one so the liturgy really followed the theme. The Anglican one is kind of set. I mean, you just go with what's there, and there isn't any variability, but there are times when the theme and the mood of that service would fit very well with what the message of the sermon is, what the time of the year is, and so forth. So particularly during, we just missed going back to it on the 7th. But anyway, yeah, we can, I'll pass that word along. You had, correct. Well, we dropped the Episcopal when we reunited the Methodist Episcopal Church South and the Methodist Episcopal Church North. It had been Methodist Episcopal Church before the split North and South. So when we reunited, I think it's in 68, 39. Anyway, I need to refresh my history. But anyway, when the Union came back of joining the two main branches with the Protestant Methodist Church, they dropped the Episcopal out of it. But Episcopal doesn't mean Episcopalian. It means our church polity, that we have a bishop, the episcopos. We have a bishop system of church organization. We do not have the congregational, where a congregation calls a minister and a congregation ordains a minister, but rather the denomination trains and ordains ministers that the bishop will appoint. And the bishop appoints with consultation with staff parish committee and so forth. But anyway, that's when and why we dropped Episcopal out of the name. Yeah, it sounds very dignified. Methodist Episcopal. We lost something. So anyway, let's pray. Well, dear God, we thank you for our tradition that makes us different and distinct from other traditions. We value the blessings of our tradition, but we do understand, as Wesley did, that with the Christian faith there is not one way, but you, dear God, work in many ways. So help us learn to appreciate and understand a lot of those other ways, but help us understand our way so that we can deeply appreciate the goodness of our own tradition. In Christ's name, amen.